And now, the Lowdown, with economist and political strategist Elson Low.
Good evening, folks. Good evening, and welcome to the Lowdown. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm your host, Elson Low. Thank you for joining us. Folks, share the link, share the link. We apologize for being just a little late tonight. We apologize for that. So share the link. Let's try to get everyone in tonight. We're going to have an interesting show, as we always do. We're going to talk about some things that are particularly interesting. I think that you'll find particularly entertaining regarding our sovereign wealth fund. We're going to chat a bit about that. We're going to chat a bit about some things that are a bit more on the concerning side, like the possibility that Guyana has seen its first significant oil spill. So we're going to talk about that as well. We're going to talk about the cost of living crisis that has continued. You know, we got to talk about that cost of living crisis, folks. Folks, share the link. Share the link. We've got an interesting show. We've got a fun show. We've got a show that should raise some serious thought-provoking questions for you tonight here on the Lowdown. I am your host, Elson Low. Thank you for starting your Saturday night on a high here with Elson Low. Thank you for coming to see the show. So share the link. Share the link. Let's give everyone an opportunity to see the show. Everyone an opportunity to be a part of tonight's events. We are going to talk about the Sovereign Wealth Fund. We're going to talk actually about some corruption scandals that have happened with sovereign wealth funds in other countries. The Sovereign Wealth Fund in Guyana, called the Natural Resources Fund, is of course where Guyana's oil and gas resources are kept. So that is obviously going to be where we're going to have all of our oil money residing, and given that it's billions of dollars, that could attract unsavory characters who are looking to steal. So we're going to talk about previous experiences that other sovereign wealth funds have had to give you some perspective as to what these dangers are, because they're new dangers. We've not experienced these types of dangers before in Guyana, so it's quite new to us. So we're going to talk a bit about that to give you some perspective on sovereign wealth funds and what you should look out for. Share the link, folks. Share the link. Welcome to the Lowdown. I'm your host, Elson Low. It's always good to be on with you. It's always good to share a fun Saturday night with you. As you know, I have as I say, sometimes a dark sense of humor. So we've got some entertaining and funny things for you here tonight. So share the link, and we'll get rolling. We'll talk about some of these unusual circumstances that the country faces. Very unusual circumstances. So share the link, and we'll try to tie these things in together to raise the alarm about what Guyana should really be anxious about when it comes to our natural resources fund, our sovereign wealth fund, the big bank account that has all of the oil monies in it. We're going to chat a bit about that. We're going to chat also about the possibility that there has been an oil spill. We know that there has been a small, allegedly a small amount, but it's a possibility that it's a larger spill than that. So we're going to talk a bit about that and of course, the concerns that are around that type of an issue. So share the link, folks. Share the link. I think what we may actually do as this story develops is we may do an entire show talking about various oil spills and the risks associated with them over the years. So keep that in mind. That's a show that will probably come up either Tuesday or on Saturday, and it's something we'll get into. All right, folks. So we're gonna get the show rolling tonight. We've got the first thing we've got to discuss is something which has come up that we've touched on before, but we've now seen what seems to be at least a final development on it. Let's get that first slide up here. Okay, so you may recall that we've got, I believe it's a permanent secretary of Ministry of Armed Affairs, who was allegedly involved in bribery or receiving a bribe. The particulars of the story, if you recall, are that there was a contractor who made a complaint to the police. The police then, about having to bribe this particular permanent secretary. The police then worked with the contractor to set up a sting where they marked several bills. And then the contractor went and paid those bills in the permanent secretary's office, paid it directly to her, and the police came in subsequently and were able to recover the marked bills and arrested her. That's a case that bounced between the DPP and the police, police PLO, Police Legal Advisory, excuse me, bounced between the police and the DPP for several times, I think 4 or 5 times before moving forward. And then the last we're hearing is that the original contractor, the individual who was involved, has declined to give evidence, so the case has been dismissed. The case has been dismissed, folks. Now, we don't know whether or not this particular PS was involved in taking bribes repeatedly, perhaps, whether this is a scheme, whether this particular PS is accustomed to these types of this type of bribery. We don't know any of these things. But what we do know about these allegations is that we're not going to get to the bottom of them. We don't know the extent of bribery that may have occurred. We don't know if it's one contract or several contracts. We don't know if this is something that happens across that entire ministry under the direction of that permanent secretary. We don't know these things. What we do know is that there will not be a trial, so we will not be able to get to the bottom of it. This, to my mind, is totally unacceptable. And PvP, it's pretty classic PvP. But there needs to be something done to ensure that this case is resolved. It's not acceptable that you've had a police sting, so a very elaborate operation with lots of evidence attached, and then nothing comes of it. First off, obviously it being a waste of the state's resources. It is not a light case where there's just an allegation. It's a case where there may be hard evidence of corruption. So we need to see this case resolved. We need to see this case reach a trial and for a verdict to be given. On the other hand, if it is this particular permanent secretary was not accepting a bribe, which it could have been, perhaps she was just taking a look at the new $2,000 bills. She was interested in that, and that's how she ended up with the marked bills in her possession. That's a possibility. But until we have a proper, until this actually goes to court, how are we to know what exactly happened? It could be that she has an affinity for the $2,000 bill. She likes how it looks. It's plastic. It has a strange look. She likes how it smells. That's why she took these funds from the particular contractor that had been marked by the police. Again, we don't know, but what we do know is that there won't be a trial. That's what we know. Now, I want you to keep that at the back of your mind, because you may recall that we in the opposition have been calling for an investigation into the allegations put forward by a certain Sue Jurong regarding the vice president. And so similarly, we have not seen a trial. We have not seen a trial. Now, it could be that all of Sue's allegations are unfounded. It could be that. But until we see an investigation and we see this go to court, we will not be able to see that the vice president is innocent. We won't know. In the same way that with this particular PS, can't say. All that we know is that there's allegations, that there are serious allegations, and that the allegations paint a very negative picture of the country and of the government. Now, what we would like to see is investigations, is court cases, to find out the truth and to clear the air and to help with the country's reputation as well regarding these particular incidents. But if we don't get even to the stage of going to court, if we don't even go that far, then how are we to know what the truth is? Folks, how are we to know that? And even further, does this mean that senior officials will not be facing the rule of law, will not be under the rule of law, can essentially live free from consequence, no matter what crime or they commit? Is that the Guyana that we want to see? We need to see these types of cases go to court so that we can, first of all, ensure that the state's resources are used well. Second of all, ensure that there's justice. And third of all, ensure that the country's reputation is intact as a place that does not tolerate corruption. And something I mentioned before, I can't name any senior official that has ever gone to jail for corruption in Guyana, which may mean that Guyana doesn't have corruption, but I don't know if I would agree with that particular position. So this is something that has come up. It is quite alarming, quite surprising, and to my mind, the mere fact that this case has been dismissed, I think, is worthy of a further investigation to find out what exactly is going on there. That is what I think is necessary. So that's one particular area, very concerning. But let's jump across to the next area that's very concerning. Let's get the next slide up. Okay, so we've now got reports today that there was an oil spill, I believe on Friday, that Exxon has indicated was a small oil spill, 1 barrel of oil. And they've also indicated that they've been able to contain that and ensure that there's not been any significant environmental damage. We've not heard anything under the Environmental Protection Agency, as far as I can tell, not heard anything at all from them regarding this. We had a statement come out of the operator rather than from the EPA. But we've also got some reports that it may be more than that amount. In fact, some eyewitnesses are saying that they believe that it is a much more significant amount of oil that is out there. Now, sorry for that little interruption there, viewers. Now, it may be that this is indeed just 1 barrel of oil. It's, of course, possible. But I believe that given that there are individuals who are reporting that they're seeing more oil than that there should be an investigation by the EPA, that there should be a survey that is going on. And if there is more than is realized, whether perhaps the operator just missed that, who knows? That needs to be dealt with as a matter of urgency, because an oil spill is not something light. It is not a small matter, and it can span huge areas of the ocean. So we don't want to be going in that direction at all. Of course, the issue of the insurance for Guyana, of whether or not Guyana is going to get full coverage insurance, the appropriate level of insurance to ensure that if there is an oil spill, we are able to deal with it. That is something that has been discussed at length. And of course, we in the opposition have said that we need to have that level of insurance, which is tied to the operators, the parent companies, and not the local subsidiary, which could declare bankruptcy quite easily. So we need to see those types of provisions. And this oil spill, I think, is a bit of a warning to Guyanese, to have them to open up, to be aware of the fact that these dangers exist, that we face these dangers, and as a result of it, we must be alert to the risks that are connected with offshore oil production, just as much as we are alert to the benefits that come from offshore oil production. We need to be alert to the risks. Very concerning, folks. We need to see an immediate survey of what is going on, an immediate study of what is going on to identify, first of all, the extent of the spill, but second of all, the causes of the spill. And the EPA, I believe, needs to take the appropriate action. We also the country needs to have confidence that the EPA can fill its mandate in the way that it indicates. And I believe that not hearing from them regarding this spill raises a lot of questions. We need answers to those questions, so we need the EPA to come out and to indicate what measures it has in place to monitor the operations offshore Guyana, and to ensure that those operations are indeed meeting the standards that we expect of them. So we need the EPA to come out and to come clean and clarify exactly what is going on and why it is as well that they didn't even say anything we heard from the operator. As far as I can tell, I haven't seen any statement from the EPA. This is very concerning, and it is a matter that can be very urgent, because we don't know the extent of the damage that's going on offshore. We don't know what exactly is going on. Very concerning. And an oil spill, of course, can cost hundreds of millions of dollars to clean up. Easily cost that. So we need to get some clarity on this pretty much immediately. That's one area that is very concerning. Absolutely. Let's jump across to the next slide as we go along here, viewers. As we roll along, I know we've got a bit of an a concerning start. A couple of issues that are pretty concerning, but I'll draw your attention to one which is as entertaining as it is concerning. In fact, I've kind of made an effort to tone it down a bit because this, we don't want to glorify those people who have been who face very substantial corruption allegations, who it is alleged may have stolen as much as $4 billion from countries. But there you've got Leonardo DiCaprio standing next to an individual known as Jolo, unfortunately named Jolo. Of course, my last name is Low. His is also Low. He's not a relation, as far as I know. But Jolo is famous because he's said to have orchestrated the 1MDB scandal, in which about $4 billion of Malaysia's money went missing, where it is alleged that, well, actually, I shouldn't say alleged, where hundreds of millions of dollars ended up in the bank account of one of Malaysia's former PMs. Where when the PM's house was raided, I think there were hundreds of handbags and jewelry and $27 million US in cash lying around the place. It was crazy. And Jolo himself actually funded the film The Wolf of Wall Street, allegedly with the funds from Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund, just like our natural resources fund. So this guy basically stole the funds from their sovereign wealth fund and used those funds for his own ends. It is incredibly concerning what happened there. Of course, Jolo, apart from funding a film, bought extensive amounts of jewelry for his then girlfriend, who I believe was a Victoria's Secret model. He bought houses in Los Angeles and apartments in New York, and he is famous for saying that he goes to the best parties. He plans his night out elaborately so that he can go to all the best events and so on. But this money was coming really from Malaysia's sovereign wealth fund. And so the people of Malaysia really suffered as a result of this. Now, what we're saying, and this is what we brought up in the press conference, is we have entered a new era. We have entered an era where we now have billions of dollars lying around. The sovereign wealth fund is expected here in Guyana, the Natural Resources Fund, to receive over $1 billion US of revenue from the oil and gas industry this year alone. This is in addition to the hundreds of millions, I believe 600 million that was there before. So we've now got substantial funds lying around, as they say. And as we indicated in the press conference, we're accustomed to talking about corruption going out the front door. That is to say, corruption in our roads, corruption in our procurement process. We're accustomed to that type of corruption. But we now must keep at the back of our mind that sovereign wealth funds have their own types of corruption, where high officials in a government can coordinate with the members of a fund, coordinate with international financial institutions, and steal funds out of the natural resource fund, steal funds right out of the country's bank account when it comes to their natural resources. And so what happened in Malaysia is that about $4 billion went missing. It is alleged that Jolo himself personally got about 1.2 billion. And I think there's also an allegation, but that may now be a fact rather than an allegation, that about 700 million found its way to the Prime Minister at the time. He has been, let's throw up the next slide. I think we got a picture of the PM. No. We got a further one. The next one after that. Let's see. We got a picture of Jolo and the PM there. Yeah, there we go. Joe's always in a tuxedo. There we go. We got a picture of Jolo and in a tuxedo. Always in a tuxedo. Why is he always in a tuxedo? Because he's always out, viewers. He's always hanging out. I think you can see a picture of one of the properties he purchased, and in your top corner there, you can see the Malaysian PM. He has recently been sentenced to 12 years in jail for his activities regarding the sovereign wealth fund. So, not a short time in jail. I would describe that as not a short time in jail. His wife, of course, is the one who is when they raided his house, was in possession of hundreds and hundreds of handbags, billions of dollars in jewelry, to in excess of 20, I believe it's 27 million US in a box lying around somewhere. Really absurd amounts of money. And Joe, of course, is also indicated that there's more. That's just the tip of the iceberg. They've got a lot more loot stashed. Joe, these folks that steal money, what do? They buy yachts. Joe had himself a nice big yacht called the Equanimity, which was a yacht where he held lots of parties, met with lots of investors. He also met with several folks from the Middle East, some of whom are in jail currently for crimes connected to this particular scandal. So just because someone is coming from the Middle East doesn't mean that they're coming with money. It could be that they're coming to collect your money. So we have to exercise a lot of caution. And that's one of the things that we indicated about our sovereign wealth fund, which is that we should avoid one-on-one meetings. We should avoid backdoor meetings. Everything should be out in the open. Everything should be out in the open, and we should get reports on what occurred in each of these meetings so that the country knows what the purpose of the meetings is and what it is that actually happened in the meeting. It shouldn't just be this kind of trust me and everything will be cool approach to things. That is the furthest thing from acceptable, especially when you're talking about the huge numbers that we're talking about here. Absolutely huge numbers. $1.2 billion gone. The Gas Ashore project, which the price of which is very much in debate, that project was supposed to provide cheap electricity to Guyana, is 1.1 billion currently. So can you imagine that he's stolen? Well, actually, I think it may be more than that. But the pipeline itself is 900 million US. Just look at the pipeline. And this one person has stolen more than we would spend on an entire gas pipeline for a whole nation. This one person has stolen more than that. You can understand the scale of this. It's huge in scale, absolutely huge in scale. So we must now be aware that this is a danger that exists. We must now be aware that this danger exists. So to take us through a bit of the details of it, we're going to throw on a video in a second here to take us through some of the details. We want to get a sense of how exactly did this happen? What are the steps that were taken that resulted in this huge loss? How did Joe manage to siphon off such a huge amount of money? What should we look out for as a nation in these situations? Because we don't want to be following the path of Malaysia. We want to be carving our own path, and we want to avoid these types of situations. As entertaining as it may be, that Joe took the money and went off and bought fancy houses all over and funded a movie and dated a supermodel and bought jewelry for her. And all of that is quite entertaining. But ultimately, there are a lot of poor people in Guyana, there are a lot of poor people in Malaysia. And this is the furthest thing from acceptable. It's not these, sometimes people will justify things by saying, oh, it's a victimless crime. And as much as that is not a justification. In this particular instance, they were victims. And that is the average citizen in Malaysia. So we're gonna throw on a video if that's ready. That's just going to go through everything. We'll play a couple minutes of it, then we'll chat on the other side.
Is one of the biggest frauds, financial frauds in history.
We woke up one morning in July 2015 to realize that almost $700 million had gone into the Prime Minister's account.
The disappearance of billions of dollars from Malaysia's state fund is one of the biggest financial scandals, not just in Malaysia, but around the world.
Of the $8 billion that 1MDB raised via bond sales, it's alleged more than half was stolen.
That's different from a stock fraud or pumping up a stock and then cashing out on your options. This is actual theft of money. 1MDB in Malaysia had been actually some kind of a piggy bank for various, players.
The stolen money went to buy a private jet, luxury real estate, artworks by Picasso and Monet, as well as jewelry for Mr. Najib's wife.
Up to 300,000 taking to the streets calling for Najib's head.
They are fed up with a government that they believe is chronically corrupt.
The projects that were developed by 1MDB were sold as development projects that would be benefit of everyone, but it was later realized that it cost the country probably more than it helped.
This was a cash grab by a handful of people who had put themselves in the position to make themselves rich.
It was a betrayal of the people on a grand scheme.
I arrived at the 1MDB expose through a sort of process of having started to report on the consequences of Malaysian corruption on the ground that was the destruction of the Borneo rainforest. As I looked into it, was plainly caused by political corruption. There was no logical or sensible reason, if you were governing the country for the benefit of the democratic electorate, that you would just rip out a jungle. That was done for pure profit for a handful of decision makers. So I started looking at that story because it was an enormous story with huge global ramifications.
British journalist Claire Rucastle Brown grew up in the Malaysian state of Sarawak. In 2010, she set up the Sarawak Report to expose corruption in the country of her birth.
I found that I could reach the public in Malaysia and get through what had been a very oppressive media environment to actually get information to ordinary people in Malaysia about how their country was being run. 1MDB was presented by Najib Razak, the new Prime Minister, as a wonderful opportunity. He was going to raise huge sums of money for this so-called sovereign wealth fund to invest. He was also the finance minister, of course, as well as the Prime Minister, so he would be investing the money in all sorts of money-making activities that would then be, beneficial to Malaysians in need of development. But all that money was disappearing. There was no accountability. And by the time I looked at it, we're talking about 2014, there had been 5 years of massive fundraising and then total black hole as far as where that money had gone. I think we were talking about an $11 billion deficit, unaccounted deficit by 2014. There were certain characters associated with the fund who were also dabbling in my area of interest, which was the rainforest state of Sarawak, particularly a young Chinese advisor to the fund and to the Prime Minister named Joe Low. Joe Low in particular had been gaining an international reputation for himself as a massive spender, catching the headlines in New York, Las Vegas, and indeed Hollywood. He was creating a stir. He was the highest spender in all the top nightclubs, and yet had no explanation really for his wealth.
As a lot of you in this room know, I like to plan my evenings and make sure that I always go to the best parties.
So those of us who were looking at this from Malaysia were wondering whether his advisory role at 1MDB, where all these billions were not being accounted for, might be connected to this acquisition of extraordinary wealth by a 26-year-old who'd come from nowhere. I first got my teeth into this story with the launch of a major $100 million Hollywood movie.
Okay, viewers, so you see there, the last thing she mentioned was the launch of a major Hollywood movie. So we mentioned that Joe Low would have funded Wolf of Wall Street, which is a movie about a particular Wall Street guy that engages in a lot of illegal practices. Folks, you may know that I worked on Wall Street myself, but I quit to move back to Guyana, and one of my goals in mind was to learn everything, what the tricks that these folks have, what the tricks are that these guys use, so that I could try and warn Guyanese about these tricks. And as a result, I've made a lot of comments about sovereign wealth funds and the dangers associated with them. I'll give you one example of one of the things that I've said. You may be looking at traditional corruption, like someone buying a house or someone buying a car. But one of the things that you have to be wary of is what they'll do is, for those officials that they want to influence, they'll give their children or their family member a job. And those jobs are very lucrative. You can make huge amounts. And those jobs have bonuses where you could make an 80,000 US bonus one go, or 150,000 on the higher end US bonus on one go. And in fact, that's one of the allegations regarding another sovereign wealth fund, that is what happened. So even actually, if you care to view it, if you look at The Wolf of Wall Street, there's a scene where the Wall Street, the person engaged in illegal activity on Wall Street actually offers the person investigating access to a job, on a job where you could make huge amounts. So that, it's a case of life mirroring art, or as they say, because that is one of the things that we must be very wary of. So we have to look not just at those who are members of our sovereign wealth fund itself, but we have to look at their family members to see whether there's any connection between financial institutions that we're working with from a national perspective and private folks who, may be able to maybe getting a job at these institutions. So that is something which is very, very important that we keep an eye out for. It is something that would potentially fly by us as Guyanese because we're not accustomed to that type of corruption. But folks, we got to get accustomed. We got to get accustomed. We cannot allow ourselves to be vulnerable, both on the front end with procurement fraud and whatnot, and on the back end with people coming here with smiling faces that are bribing these things, and we must prevent them from happening. In fact, in the press conference, one of the things we said is that because the PUP has not investigated Vice President Jack Dio and the allegations put forward, revelations really by Sue, because we don't know the truth there, it is a signal to those who would engage in illegal activities that if you come and you do something illegal and you're caught, there won't be an investigation. No investigation. Now, of course, we need to know the truth. But folks, I'll throw you right back to the start of this show. Because didn't we start with a permanent secretary who was caught in, or allegedly caught in, a sting, marked bills, accepts the bills, the police come and arrest her, she has the bills in her possession, the contractor alleges that he's being pressured for a bribe, so on and so forth. But now there's not going to be a trial. So can you imagine now? Because people will say, oh, corruption, it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal, it's not important. If you are a Joe Low and you see that Guyana is going to accumulate billions of dollars in its sovereign wealth fund, in our natural resources fund, and you know to yourself that if you are able to steal that money, nothing will happen. Can you understand that makes Guyana a target? That we are now, because we've not acted in the way that we needed to act, because the PUP has not acted the way they need to act, Guyana is now a target. You realize that? So, folks, individuals that say that corruption is not important, that it's a victimless crime, that you don't have to think about it, that's not a serious statement. That's not a serious argument. And the amounts that are now at stake are so huge that corruption is now more important than it used to be, because it's not 10 million or 5 million, which back in the day might have been very substantial. It's $1 billion US that could go missing. It's 2 billion. It's 4 billion. This is a very serious matter, and that's why we've raised it as an opposition. That's why I've also raised it as an economist, and I'm glad that I've got experience from Wall Street to be able to. We've entered a new realm. We have also called for all of the members of Guyana's Natural Resources Fund, which is our sovereign wealth fund, to file with the Integrity Commission so that we know what their assets are, so that we know what it is they have, so that if we see a sudden change in their assets, we can be alerted that something might be going on. If we see all of a sudden they start buying houses in Los Angeles and houses in New York like Jolo, we can be aware, hey, there might be a problem here. So that is why we need to see filings done, thorough filings with the Integrity Commission from all of those members of Guyana's Natural Resources Fund. Now we're gonna jump back into the video and give you some further perspective as to how these things unfold and what we in Guyana must be aware of. So we're gonna jump back into the video now.
For Wall Street, which is all about a bunch of crooks who'd stolen money and were spending it.
The real question is this: was all this legal? Absolutely not.
Which is exactly what the funders of the movie were doing, of course, through 1MDB. Because I was able to join some dots and I realized that the Malaysian money funding this film more than likely came from this fund, because the producer of the movie was none other than the son of the Malaysian Prime Minister, who was in control of the fund, which is losing all this money.
Wow, this is an incredible, incredible honor.
Reza Aziz and Jolo even got a shout out at the Golden Globes.
Thank Joey, Riz, and Joe. Thank you for being not only collaborators, but taking a risk on this movie.
So the 1MDB scandal could not have happened on just a localized basis. It was necessary for the ringleader, the alleged, an accused ringleader of this, Jolo, to find accomplices and people that he could deal with in other countries around the world. As you look back and unwind the development of 1MDB and who the early partners were, there was clearly a certain amount of collusion from interested parties in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates.
The Petro-Saudi data, which was passed to me by a whistleblower, a former director of the company, behind the original setting up of the first joint venture of 1MDB with this Saudi shell company, that was purporting to be an oil company right at the start of this extended scandal. You see the emails which show a bunch of young men agreeing to pull off this scam. But at the end of the letter they said, of course, we would also be willing to act as a front if that would be useful for some of your operations. So it was all there, along with the data that showed the transfers of money. The initial deal, the Petro-Saudi bond deal and joint venture, siphoned nearly $2 billion out of the fund. That was the first information I got hard data on.
Jolo has been charged in the United States with being basically the ringleader of this fraud, the guy who orchestrated it, even though he had no title within 1MDB. I've been asked whether or not he's like a brilliant guy or a criminal genius. I don't think so. It's more, he's financially very sophisticated. He understood, according to the charging documents in the US, how to set up shell companies and how to hide the identity of certain entities and to create that first level of obfuscations. People like Jolo and some other, individuals were able to construct an elaborate set of deceptions and shell companies that sounded just like real companies in order to, divert the money, launder it, cover it up, and make it appear as though everything was fine. Jolo was very smart about covering his tracks. One of the first things he did, right when 1MDB was getting up and running in 2009, Jolo basically established an account at a bank or a company in the Seychelles called Goodstar. After the deal was struck to invest in this joint venture with sign-off from the 1MDB board, a mysterious loan obligation appears that $700 million of the first $1 billion committed to this venture is going to go to pay back a loan from Petro-Saudi. The U.S. government discovered that there was no such loan, but under the excuse that a $700 million loan had to be paid immediately out of the first $1 billion, a transfer took place from 1MDB's primary bank to, it was described it was going to go to Petro-Saudi, but in fact it went to this small shell company called Goodstar. And the ownership was hidden. It was like one share, a bearer bond, that was owned by Jolo, but none of that was obvious. So he was smart enough to disguise that first transaction and have a cover story that Goodstar was actually the name of the venture. Perhaps the most famous example of Jolo's ability to disguise, hide, or obscure the source or the destination of the funds was an outfit that one of his colleagues came up with called Blackstone.
All right, thank you, viewers, for looking at that interesting little clip. Now, the speaker was just about to talk about Blackstone, Asia Realtor, something to that effect. Blackstone is a very big investment company, investment-oriented company in the US. So the idea is that good old Joe sets up companies that sounded like official companies in order to trick folks into thinking that that's what was happening. But I also want to point out a couple of things that I think are very relevant to Guyana. One is, we heard there about money laundering. Folks, have we ever had a problem with money laundering here in Guyana? Remind me. Was Guyana ever blacklisted for money laundering? For money laundering questions? So this is already looking very familiar. Very familiar. And that is really a great concern here, is that folks might be looking to steal from the Sovereign Wealth Fund and to launder those monies. We don't know. We have to keep our eyes open to see what happens in the future, but we have to be alert to the possibilities. We have to be alert to these possibilities. That's one thing. The other thing I found interesting is, at the beginning of the video, I believe it was said that 700 million was found in the Prime Minister's accounts. So he was involved, and that's how he got 12 years jail. Prime Minister was involved, so the highest levels of government, whether it's the president, the vice president, the prime minister, high levels of government is what we're talking about here. He was involved, so the highest level of government, 700 million. But I don't know if you caught it, folks, but the first payment that was made out of 1MDB, wasn't that a $700 million that was transferred? Folks, this is a whole scheme right here. It is a whole system, and that system is designed to ensure that the ordinary person, at least in Malaysia, was not able to benefit from their sovereign wealth fund. We're not going to allow that to happen. As an opposition, we're going to do everything in our power to try and stop these types of things from happening. And the first step is to raise awareness as to the nature of the threat. To raise awareness as to the nature of the threat. We're going to go back into the video for a bit more as we wind the show down.
Real estate, which sounds remarkably like a, very successful U.S., private equity firm, Blackstone, but it has nothing to do with the real Blackstone. It was just a shell company that used the name Blackstone to sort of give it, a level of credibility. This happened over and over again, coming up with, bogus names that sounded good or that sounded like or might be similar to, so that the banks who were, unknowingly basically passing along money from one company to another, it wouldn't raise any obvious red flags.
Today, the Department of Justice has filed a civil complaint seeking to forfeit and recover more than $1 billion in assets associated with an international conspiracy to launder funds stolen from One Malaysia Development Berhad, or 1MDB.
What makes this such a potent and devastatingly successful theft, if you will, is basically he had the support of the government of Malaysia in the form of the Prime Minister.
If somebody has transgressed the law, then, they have to face the music.
The money spread around the world, and a great deal of it was laundered in the US.
You can see this extraordinary constellation of luxury properties and homes in Beverly Hills, in New York, and in London, famous pieces of art, luxury boats, gambling sprees in Las Vegas. It's one thing looted from people in countries around the world, but also when that money's coming to the US and coursing through our system, all this dirty money is a major cause of concern.
As pressure mounted on the Malaysian Prime Minister Najib Razak, he was ousted from power in May 2018. The new Prime Minister, Mahathir Mohamad, wins partly on a platform that calls for an investigation into the missing billions from 1MDB.
There are many charges that can be preferred against those involved.
Soon after the election, police raid properties linked to Mr. Najib and his wife, Rosma Mansour, and seize hundreds of boxes of luxury goods.
We have sealed the bags, but we know they contain money and we know they contain jewellery.
Police carted away 284 boxes containing luxury handbags and 72 bags stuffed with cash and jewellery.
The haul, which authorities later value at $273 million, includes 567 handbags, 423 watches, 234 pairs of sunglasses and 14 tiaras. In amongst the trinkets was $29 million in cash. The couple maintained the luxury goods were gifts and that the cash was political donations.
The country and the people suffer, and we must get hold of every cent that's been taken out from the country.
After facing trial for just some of the charges, Najib Razak has been sentenced to 12 years in prison and fined $50 million. He's appealed.
Viewers, I was particularly entertained by the fact that she had quite so many tiaras. I didn't know that people collected tiaras. And also, I thought that it was 270 or so handbags, but I stand corrected. It was 278 boxes of handbags. Even when it comes to the money, I said 27 million cash, but it was 29 million cash. Beyond belief. And the hoard, the total amount, comes up to was it $270 million or in excess of $250 million. Folks, a bank account. But this is an additional 250 or 270 million in actual goods. So you have to add that to the 700 million. Folks, we're approaching $1 billion. Are you aware, dear viewers, that Guyana will have $1.1 billion in its sovereign wealth fund this year alone? It is entirely possible that if we are subject to fraud, we could lose just as much as they've lost in Malaysia. It is entirely possible. So we must make the appropriate safeguards, put the appropriate safeguards in place, remain alert as a public, ask questions, and press the government to always be accountable. Now there are some safeguards in place, but the question is whether these will stand the test that they will face. And we don't know. We're just going to have to see. But at least we need to be armed with the knowledge that in other countries, their senior members of government have taken a 700 million in the bank account, taken a 270 million in goods, had that lying around in their house, been collecting tiaras for their wife, had 270 boxes containing handbags, not 270 handbags, 270 boxes containing handbags. How many handbags this is late? Anyway, viewers, this stuff is pretty entertaining. I mean, maybe I don't understand the dynamic of handbags, but I don't know how you could use, if it's 4 handbags per box, you're talking about 1,000 handbags. How can you use, that means you're using a handbag once every 3 years? Anyway, life is an interesting thing. Life is an interesting thing, but ultimately, we don't want Guyana's experience to be as interesting as Malaysia's experience. We prefer to stay away from that level of drama. And so we want to see our sovereign wealth fund, our natural resources fund in safe hands, and we want to see our natural resources fund free throughout the entire time that it runs from corruption, free from corruption. This is highly troubling, and you know it is utterly disturbing that a prime minister would do that to his own country. One of the other things I wanted to point out to you viewers that some of you may have caught and others maybe not recognized, but the U.S. government said that they're engaging in civil asset forfeiture to take back the monies that and the properties and so on that were stolen, and that the properties that were purchased with the stolen money. Now, you may recall that we did have an agency which dealt with that. It was called the State Assets Recovery Agency. But viewers, it was disbanded almost as almost one of the first acts that the PPP took was to disband that particular agency. I wonder why they might have wanted to remove an agency like that. That's a question that I have to ask of the PPP. Why did the PPP take the decision to do that? Of course, I had worked at the agency, so full disclosure. But one of the things I did at the agency is I did research on corruption and oil, and I did research on these very sovereign wealth funds that we're talking about today. So I guess at some level the agency did add some value, because now we are prepared as a country, or at least the folks who are advising the leading opposition are prepared and aware of the risks, which is why we have raised these risks now that the sovereign wealth fund is constituted. But this may again indicate that we may need to see a similar agency to SARA to track down if there are funds that are stolen these types of properties, just as the US was tracking down that money and those properties that were gotten through illegal activities. Just an interesting one to point out. Folks, we're going to take a last look at the video just to tie things off, and then we'll wrap up for the evening.
Appealing the decision.
What do you say to those who say that you've acted dishonestly about the funds? You know, you've been called all sorts of things, including a thief. What's your response to that?
There's no evidence of that. I mean, you cannot just, accuse somebody.
But you have admitted that the funds did end up in your accounts, even though it was a donation from the Saudi government.
Yeah, it's been cleared. There's been no wrongdoing.
There is an appeal process in Malaysia, which is extremely lenient towards the rich and powerful, and which continues for years. And so therefore, Najib continues to walk free, and he indeed continues to vote in Parliament while his case is under appeal.
The 1MDB case is far from over. It's spread to all corners of the globe. Jolo is a fugitive, and there's plenty of money still missing. Not to mention the amount Malaysia is paying in interest on those original shady bond deals.
More than $11 billion of debt racked up in 5 years.
There are a lot of people, when you talk about it, their eyes just glaze over. It's numbers that we're talking about, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, financial concepts that not all people are familiar with.
Ultimately, when this type of thing happens, the people who benefit are just that cream at the top, the kleptocrats, and the people who lose, the people who remain impoverished, are the people who were nominally intended to benefit from the development of the oil wells or the mining concession or whatever.
The scandal has revealed just how easily money laundering can take place and how far corruption can reach. The complicity of the global financial system continues to be exposed.
The department filed criminal charges in New York against the Goldman Sachs Group and its Malaysian subsidiary, charging each with conspiracy to violate the anti-bribery provisions of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act.
Malaysia and Goldman agreed on a settlement of $3.9 billion.
Financial scandal after financial scandal involving big banks.
To be able to divert that much money from basically a government-sponsored enterprise and then use a network of global banks is just astounding.
All right, thank you, viewers, again for giving us a few minutes of your. They said that charges had been filed against Goldman Sachs employees. As I mentioned, I worked there, but one of the reasons that I went there is to understand what some of these risks are, so that I could alert Guyanese very early what they should be aware of. And I will continue to alert Guyanese of what they should be aware of, because this is something which can be incredibly serious. Incredibly serious. And as I mentioned before, this is not the only sovereign wealth fund that has had controversy around Goldman Sachs. This is not the only one. Now, it could be that the company did nothing untoward, nothing wrong, and in some cases, charges have been dismissed and cases have gone the company's way. So I should say that in all fairness. But the point really is that we need to be aware, alert, conscious of. And I think as we close this evening's program, one last insight that was mentioned there is it tends to be those at the very top, those, friends and family of the elite who benefit from these types of huge corruption scandals. The Prime Minister's son was also implicated in this particular instance. Does that sound to you like Guyana? On that note, we'll close off for tonight. We'll remind you that the reason that we're calling for investigations is because we need to find out the truth, because we don't know, but because there are real risks associated with not investigating, and we need to mitigate those risks. Folks, have a good night, and thank you for joining us here on The Lowdown.
Thank you for watching our program. See you right back here, same place, same time. And remember, hold the line of battle, comrades. Our victory is sure.